Hello. I want to thank you for joining us as we journey deep into the unknown. Tales of terrifying creatures, monsters, and more. As we take this journey together, be on the lookout for our hosts. Anthony Canatella, Steve Wildman Monrodis, Carrie Pocket Doc Davis of Dark Angel Medical, Joshua Jones of All Tower Media. Keep a special eye out for Mr. D.A. Roberts as we dive into these tales of horror, mystery, and monsters. Welcome to D.A. Ex Machina.
Good evening, folks, and thank you for joining us for another edition of DA Ex Machina. We're going to have a great show for you tonight. Joining me tonight, my co-host is my brother Anthony Canatella. Anthony, you doing all right tonight, brother?
Yes, sir. Doing great.
And we have special guests in the house tonight from the Olympic Project. We've got Shane Corson, Chris Spencer, both here. These guys are going to bring a wealth of experience and knowledge to share with us tonight, and I really can't wait to jump into this because I've been following the Olympic Project for some time now. Shane, Chris, thank you guys for joining us. If you guys would like to take a second, introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your background, and we'll kind of go from there.
All right. Well, I'll start out and give Chris the second seat here. But yeah, my name's Shane Corson. I've been involved with the Olympic Project since about 2012. Grew up in Scotland, moved to the States in 93. Always been fascinated with cryptids in general, paleontology, but specifically Sasquatch. And moving to Southern California, I kind of dove in head first in the subject matter, doing investigations and interviewing people from the year around 97 throughout, continuing on. But down in California, I did a lot of stuff up and down the coast of California. Moved up to Oregon and with my wife and really, really heavily got involved with the Sasquatch matter. And now I'm up in Washington State, where I'm now, involved with the Olympic Project, and we're just currently doing what we do up here in the Pacific Northwest, studying the Sasquatch phenomena as best as we can. So that's the little intro to myself.
And I'm Chris Spencer, born and raised in Washington State. From early age, I knew about Bigfoot. My parents had a cabin up in Packwood, Washington, and shortly after the In Search of program came out in the 70s with the Patterson-Gimlin film in it, my dad and I actually found some interesting tracks. I must have been seven or eight, maybe actually 6 or 7. Don't remember much about the tracks. I just remember my dad's reaction, who at the time was a total skeptic. And they freaked him out a lot. Time went on. I went to WSU, studied history and anthropology. In 1991, my Anthropology 101 professor was Grover Krantz. I didn't realize, I knew nothing. I wasn't following Bigfoot. I was 19, just in college, and I had no idea that he was in the topic of Bigfoot at all. And he actually devoted one lecture to the subject of Sasquatch, and I walked into class and there were tracks and his Gigantopithecus skull on the counter, and it was actually one of the best lectures I ever sat in. Unfortunately, I did not record it. I have notes from it and stuff, but up to that point, I can say my dad always said the Patterson-Gimlin film was a guy in a suit, and when I left that class, because Grover actually had a third-generation copy of the film, and he broke it down and explained why he believed that was not a person in a suit. And when I left that class, I believed that film was real. Life went on. I've always kind of followed the subject a little bit. I wasn't obsessed with it like I am now, but in 2013, my son and I went on a camping trip up the gorge on the Washington side. We were actually in Skamania County. It was his spring break. He was 13 years old, and he wanted to try a tent that I got him for his birthday. And we went to the Skamania County campground, and we were the only people there. We were the first people there. The campground had opened like 5 days before we got there. and we had a interesting night. We had an interesting experience. We didn't see anything, but we heard some things, or I heard some things, and we found some tracks. After that, I was I was kind of determined I was going to delve into this subject more. Um, I started listening to podcasts, and I did the whole YouTube thing. Yeah, I did what everybody does. I checked out what was on YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
read as many books as I could find, and I'd heard Shane. Shane had a podcast at that time. I'd heard him speak several times, and David Ellis, and I wanted I wanted to get to know the Olympic Project, and actually in 2015, I did one of their public expeditions where I met everybody, um, became friends with everybody, and I stayed in contact quite a bit with David because I really liked the audio aspect. I liked the idea of putting audio recorders out in the woods for as longest period of time and recording when people weren't there. And I actually in 2015 started recording in an area where I have gotten suspect vocalizations and percussives, and I think it was around 2016 or 17. Me and Shane started going out, and I've been officially a member of the Olympic Project since about 2017. So there we go.
Cool. Very cool.
Definitely very cool. Well, for those in the audience that may not be aware of the Olympic Project, and hopefully they are all aware of it, but just in case, would one of you guys like to explain a little bit about the Olympic Project? I mean, I know I've been listening to Monster X Radio for a long time, and I've seen several documentaries that you guys have been involved in. So, in case anybody is not aware of those, so you guys can break it down just a little bit.
Yeah, so the Olympic Project was founded by two individuals, Richard Jameau and Derek Randalls, I believe back in 2009. And basically, we're a group of individuals that are like-minded with the same goals, the same passions, the same ideas. Many of these individuals in the Olympic Project have either had an encounter or a sighting, and quite a few of them have not. So we have a lot of skeptical intellectual individuals involved in our study. We have individuals that are both academic, as in archaeologists, primatologists, wildlife biologists, and we have everybody from hikers to hunters and just general outdoorsmen and outdoors women involved in this project. And basically, our main goal is just to collect as much data as we can on something that for many of us we know to exist. We're collecting as much data, compiling that data, and conducting different experiments in the field. And so we're, like I said before, we're very all kind of on the same page for the most part. You have some very involved members. You have some members that are semi-involved. But our goal really is just to collect as much data on this topic matter and subject matter as we can. We're not necessarily out to prove the existence of Sasquatch. We're mainly here just to collect data, look at the data, and in that day that say Sasquatch is proven to exist, we'll have a plethora of data available for not just public consumption, but also academic consumption. But we are currently working with a lot of different academic individuals from all sorts of fields, which is really something unique, including working with Project Zoo Book, Amy Boo, in Project Zoo Book, talking to individuals, collaborating, hypothesizing, testing those ideas, and just going over what known animals do and comparing that to some of the stuff that we're not just recording but seeing and finding in the field. And we do have a couple of individuals and groups inside the project that are heavily invested in this subject matter to the point where it's a job of passion and one you don't get paid for. Obviously, I don't think I know any real anybody that's into the subject matter really doesn't make any money, and that's not the goal. It shouldn't be the goal. I don't poo-poo on those that do make a little money off this. Good for them, but we spend everything out of our own pocket for the most part. And we just enjoy what we do. At the end of the day, we just enjoy what we do. And that's what I think separates us from a lot of individuals. We don't bicker, argue within the group. We all share the same ideas and goals. And so I'm really proud to have been involved with the Olympic Project and proud to have members like Chris Spencer and Todd Hale and Rebecca Ann Slick and Cindy Dosen and Cindy Cadell. I mean, Derek Randall. The list goes on. We have a good group, good solid group of individuals that are working for the better.
Yeah, I mean, now either one of you's had a sighting in that area or no?
Well, we have a couple of different areas. Like Chris Spencer, he works down in southwestern Washington. That's his where he kind of started. Now he works up here in the Olympics as well. We have individuals that work different areas. Our main area is, in the Olympics. That's our main point of interest. And but I've never personally had a sighting up in that area. I've had a lot of odd occurrences. I've found tracks and audio stuff. I did have a sighting in Mount Hood in 2011. Back in August of 2011. So which solidified for me the existence of Sasquatch. After that, there was no question. Up until that point, I was very skeptical.
That was me. Same way.
Exactly. So when it happens, it happens. And this happened to me in 2011 in an area that I wasn't really researching. It was a fishing trip with a couple of buddies. But that's how a lot of people get involved in this. They go about their daily business. I was involved in the Sasquatch matter beforehand in California and Oregon for years. Never really came across anything of interest. Talked to a lot of interesting people that encounters, but I never really came across a track. And I'm an avid outdoorsman. I'm a hunter, and
Me too.
Right. But that one occurrence really brought me to where I am now.
It's like that.
Chris is it's like that, and I think Chris can probably speak to that as well. That's how it kind of shifted his direction.
Yeah, I haven't had a sighting, but I've had some absolutely crazy stuff happen around me while I've been in the woods. I've had rocks thrown at me. I've had branches thrown at me. Had power knocks go off very close to me. And in all instances, I've never been so scared in my life.
Oh, yeah.
And generally, whenever it's happened, it's been when I've been in the real thick stuff where you can't see more than 10 feet in front of you. What got me into it was that camping trip with my son, and we had something come in twice and yank on our tent in the middle of the night. And there was a knock at the end of the night, and I found 18 by 9 inch impressions in the pine needles.
That's a big
around,
that's
where we were camped. So for me, though, I haven't had a sighting. I'm pretty solid in believing these things exist. And since I've started down the rabbit hole of recording, I've recorded a lot of audio that I can't find known animal species that matches it. And a lot of the suspect stuff I record is definitely primate and way really similar to gorilla and chimpanzee, honestly.
Yeah, and I've heard some of the stuff you guys have. It's crazy. I mean, I've never heard anything. I seen one, and that's what changed me, just like it did with Shane. It just changed me. I was a total skeptic. I'd be like, and I was hunting. I was out hunting. And that's what did it to me. And that's where I just went down the rabbit hole, the same as you guys. It will change you, because you're like, there's no way that there's a 10-foot, human-like creature running around. And then all of a sudden it just, there it is. And you're like, oh, okay. So, yeah. Mine was in Florida, but you guys are up in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, I'm sure they look different.
Right.
They act different,
Derek Buckles from the audience says, are the experiments done with the academics officially sanctioned by the respective institutions?
No. Many of these individuals that are within the Olympic Project that have been working with us, it's done on their own time, on their own penny, and not sanctioned. No, there's very, very few. I mean, you could talk about Dr. Meldrum, where some of his stuff is sanctioned, by the institute he works for, the university he works to in Idaho. But no, these are individuals that are interested in the subject matter, whether they've had their own sighting or encounter, or they've actually just looked at the physical evidence or the stuff that's out there and go, hey, you know what? We're going to look into this. And pioneers like your Dr. Bindernagel, John Bindernagel, who's passed away. He kind of led the way for that. You know, he went out on a limb like Meldrum and your Grover Krantz's and these guys who kind of laid the path work. And what I'm seeing now is that we're getting influx of academic individuals taking the subject matter serious, whether it's not about belief, it's about just looking at this, you know, subject matter and giving it a little bit of giving their background, looking into it and providing ideas and trying to they can be very skeptical, which is fine. You should be.
Yeah, it's like, what they said, it's pretty hard to hoax a footprint with a mid-torso break, you know.
Yeah. Especially in remote areas.
Exactly. You're not going to walk around, you got 18-inch foot.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about where you guys are at, but I know here in Missouri where I'm at, there's a lot of deer hunters in those woods. If you're out there walking around in a hairy suit, there's a good chance you're going to get shot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, very easy. I mean, same with up here. I mean, we do have a lot of different wildlife. We have black bears and we have, elk and deer. Where I live, we only have really blacktail. We don't have any whitetail where I live. I just got back from Idaho. I spent some time in Idaho last week in Montana. And I saw a ton of whitetail, saw traces of moose and bear. If you're out in those woods, and especially in some of these areas, even if it's not hunt season, you got a good chance of getting shot.
Of course.
And, or hit by a car if you're trying to cross the road.
Didn't that happen in Idaho
Minnesota?
A while back?
I think it was Minnesota, I believe. Yeah.
The guy in the ghillie suit tried to across and got smacked by a car.
Yep. Minnesota or Michigan, somewhere over there.
I was thinking it was Idaho, but I couldn't remember.
Maybe it was Montana. I don't remember, but it was. I don't believe it was Idaho. Well, maybe it happened in Idaho. Who knows?
Well, wherever state it wasn't very bright of him to try to do it.
No.
That's
I've
not
seen
at all.
some of your stuff. You know, the audio and stuff. That's pretty crazy. I mean, even there's so much different, even with the chatter, the samurai chatter stuff that they come out with, and even DA brought it up on the show with who was it? Doug Hychak.
Mm-hmm.
What was that stuff you were calling it? DA?
Oh, he was talking about on one of the remote lake, Snell Grove Lake up in Canada, that he heard almost sounded like singing. And the way he described it, it just kind of clicked a memory of a Norwegian herding call called calling. And when I sent that to him, he's like, that is almost exactly what I heard coming out of the woods. And I was like, wow, that's really weird.
Yeah.
But Chris, I wanted to go back to something you had mentioned earlier. You were talking about going camping. You guys were the first ones in the campground. You mentioned hearing some audio, some calls. Could you tell us a little bit about those calls?
Okay, well, on that particular event with my son, the only thing I heard was stuff walking around our camp, and then at the end of the night, because I'll just tell the story. We got there, set up camp. The campground's small. It's right on the Columbia River, right off of Highway 14, and it's just maybe 5 acres of timber. And at the time, it was really thick with lots of vine maple vegetation, undergrowth under the fir trees. Well, we'd walked up the shore of the Columbia, and we found some old degraded tracks that had come down to the river, and they were large, but they were degraded. They could have been a human. And we followed them back into the timber and then headed back towards our camp. And on our way back to camp, on this trail, we found open freshwater clamshells everywhere, just clean and open. They weren't cracked or chewed on. And it struck me as odd at the time, just because, yes, crows, ravens, lots of different birds pick up those when at low tide, because where we were at, the tide still does affect the Columbia River. A lot of otters, raccoons, and usually you find that stuff cracked and broken closer to shore. This was back in the timber, and they were all clean, like I said. So I made a mental note of that, and we got about halfway back to our camp and came across a fresh vine maple that had been twist broke and pushed out of the way of the trail. Underneath it was an 18 by 9 inch impression in the pine needles. And so we were kind of excited. We're like, holy cow, and my son was like, Bigfoot, Dad? I'm like, well, I don't know, maybe, you know. And anyways, we went about our day, made a dinner, roasted hot dogs. About 9:30, my son went to bed. I went to bed shortly after. Started sprinkling earlier in the evening, so I'd taken 2 tarps and tied them with paracord over the top of his tent because it was a kid's tent that it didn't have a rain fly. I got into bed and I woke up around 12:30 to the sound of heavy movement in the campground. And my first thought was maybe there was a herd of elk down there because it was really cold year. This was April 5th, and it was still fairly cold. We still had snow at a lower elevation. It was kind of similar to right now up here. We had snow down here yesterday. Anyways, so I was kind of thinking, well, maybe some of the animals were moving down because there's fields across the way. I started falling back to sleep, and all of a sudden something and grabbed those tarps and pulled on those tarps, and I sat straight. Yeah, I sat straight up, and I cursed, of course, and woke my son up and told him I just, had a nightmare. Go back to sleep, and he went back to sleep, and I laid there and I was like, did that happen? I started second guessing myself because I was drifting off when it happened. And just as I was convincing myself that maybe I was just hearing things, it happened again. And this time I hit the panic button on my Jeep and set off the horn and flashing lights. And I didn't sleep the rest of the night. And it was periodically, I would hear movement. We were close to the water. I heard something got in the water, was splashing around in the water. And somewhere around 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'll admit, I was completely scared. I'm sitting there. I had my 44 with me, and I couldn't get myself to get out of the tent. And around 4 o'clock in the morning, pow, knock behind, not far behind where our tent was, and it sounded like a rock on a tree, and it was done on purpose. And about 10 minutes after that, I was just like, I gotta get up. I got up, built up the fire, and waited for my son to wake up. And so that was that. That's what we heard there. So
let me ask you, did you stay an extra night or no?
No, it's funny. I asked my son. When my son finally got up, I asked him, I said, so what'd you hear last night? He goes, I heard you cussing and I heard the Jeep horn going off. And then I told him why, and he's like, I don't want to stay here another night.
Well, yeah, there you go.
We actually left.
So. Mark Napier from the audience says, have you guys seen, and if you have, what do you think about Expedition Bigfoot research in the Olympic Peninsula?
Well, honestly, I'll speak to this first. Years ago, we were invited to be a part of the show, and we don't do many TV programs, to be honest with you. We get invited to do all sorts of programs, TV show series, and we turn 99% of them down. Only because a lot of these TV shows, and my good friends, I know Cliff Barrickman and Bobo and all this, they're good friends of ours. And Finding Bigfoot was a great show. It had its flaws. I don't mind saying that at all. It had its flaws, but it was a good show. Brought a lot of stuff out into the forefront. Had a lot of people coming out of the woodwork. Nowadays, and I've worked with, I do a lot of, not lately, but I have done a lot of Skype interviews with these production companies, every single one of them. And I usually do them just to see what they're up to, what direction they're going. And once again, 99% of the time, not just myself, but many others of the Olympic Project turn them down because they want you to embellish stuff. They want to, they'll plant evidence. They'll do a lot of nefarious things. Right. Now, I can't speak to Expedition Bigfoot. I've never been a part of the show, but we politely turned them down. They wanted to come out to the nest area, and we didn't really at that time allow anybody. In fact, the only group we've allowed out there is Seth Breedlove with Small Town Monsters. And the reason,
that was a good documentary.
Exactly. And the reason we did that was because we knew that 100% they would keep it legit. They wouldn't ask us to do anything above and beyond. They'd keep it honest and straight. It's reality, not a reality TV, but it's reality. You got to keep it straight. Don't ask me to do anything. Don't plant evidence in front of my face. And I'm not saying that happens on Expedition Bigfoot. They're working, or they did work up in the Olympics. I know exactly where they're at, or where they were at. only because I know the area so well and I can watch the show, and I don't have any inside intel on that. God bless them. They're on a TV show. They're doing what they do. I know Russell Acord. I've talked to Mariah. I can't speak to anything they're doing. They're doing what they do, and we're doing what we do. Mm-hmm. And I know the areas they're working in. It's not in an area that we've been working in at all, not even remotely close. So, but what I think about it, hey, it's a TV show, and so have at it, do what you do, and make the best of it. So, but when it comes to TV in general, we avoid it like the plague. We really do, for the most part. We have done stuff in the past. Even before I was a part of the Olympic project, they were doing stuff. You live and learn. You work with some production companies, and then you learn what they're about. You work with different executives, and you feel them out. But unless somebody comes to me and really wants to do the subject matter justice, I'm on it for the fame. You really don't get any money unless you get a series, and then after a couple series, you make a lot of money. The first couple of seasons, you don't make diddly squat. And I know this for a fact. But what it does for me, being a part of a TV show, it takes away from your actual research. Because if you have cameramen following you around, if you have this, what are you going to get done? Just my opinion, not a lot. So we mainly avoid that sort of thing. But I encourage those that want to do that stuff to do it and have fun at it. And Russell and them, I think, are having a grand old time, and they got a lot of fans, and so awesome.
I've always figured it'd be very difficult to get any actual real research done with a camera crew and lights traipsing around behind you, making all kinds of racket. One of the things I wanted to ask you guys about, and one of the first times I ever saw it done was on the Small Town Monsters documentary that you guys did. Did you guys pioneer the technique of using decoy camps? Because that was the first time I'd ever seen it.
I can't say that I've done it. So when I was in Oregon, we had, I worked at the Tillamook Forest for 4 years. And we had talked about doing that. We had never done it down there. My buddy Larry Turner and I had talked about doing it. We had never done it down there. Derek Randall's, when we were up in the Olympics, we were talking about it, and we both had the same idea. And so we actually implemented that idea as a dummy camp. But I know I'm sure there's many others that have tried it. Thing is, you got to perfect it. We've done it one time, and we got new ideas. In fact, I was just chatting with our little core group tonight about some new ideas that we're going to implement. I don't want to mention them because as soon as you mention these things on air, I swear
everybody does them. Yeah.
Everybody does it. Everybody owns it, and it was their idea.
Right.
And we got a really cool, unique idea coming down the road here. I don't know if it will become public, but it's actually a really different angle, totally different. But it's kind of along the lines of a dummy camp. I'll say that. And it's going to be unique. But I don't know if we pioneered that. I won't claim that. I'm sure, like I said, there's others that have. But we have actually done it. So we've done it. We've documented it. What we learned was that we could do better. And we got some new ideas on how to put this dummy camp and really perfect it. I think there's a lot of potential there, possibly. But everybody comes up with an idea, but you got to implement that idea. You can't just come up with it. You can come up with any idea, and you can try and patent it and all that, and claim that you own it. We're not claiming we own any of these ideas, but we will follow through with those ideas.
Yeah, I know there was a group of friends of mine and I here went out on the Mark Twain National Forest. It's been some years back, and we did a kind of a twofold strategy. We had people that were stationed out in blinds, basically just entrenched and crouched down as hard and hidden as well as they could be hidden. And there were 6 of us that just sat in camp acting like we were camping out. And we got some kind of interesting results from that because it wasn't just a decoy camp. There were people in the camp.
DA, I think that's genius. And the reason I say that's genius because we were actually doing that and going to be doing more of that. Chris Spencer and Rebecca and Slick are coming up to spend a week up in this area, and we're going to be implementing some of those ideas. Chris has spent some money on some equipment and stuff. We're going to be implementing that stuff down the road here, even more so based on some past experiences. And really that idea, kind of what you're talking about, minus the blind per se, we're going to be doing that as well. But Barcatino, And I think he really came up with this idea, and that's why we utilize it. And Barcatino is a part of the Limit Project. He's kind of loosely associated with us because he's down in California, but definitely a part of the Limit Project. But he's had two sightings through a therm, one up in Washington and one in the Sierras of California. And what he did was he would, kind of, have everybody around a campfire doing their thing, and then he would peel away. And he's done it twice, one by accident. He went actually, the time up in Washington, he actually went to go take a leak and then grabbed his therm and saw something where he had taken a leak from. In the Sierras, he peeled away from a group of individuals camping around a fire and caught 3 or 4 different individuals. So there's something to be said about having a group of individuals and peeling away, or maybe stationed in blinds before everybody gets settled, so that they're already in place. I think there's something to that, and I think Chris Spencer and I have talked about this at length, as well as a bunch of others. That, I believe Barcatino's even talked about this. That we believe that as a possibility that Sasquatch cannot keep track of multiple individuals. They get their sight set on a group, and when someone peels away, possibly they're the outlier, and it's hard to keep track of people. We actually, Chris Spencer and I and Rebecca and Slick had an experience a couple of weeks ago, or about a month ago, where by accident we did something similar and had during the day had something like that occur. We didn't get anything on FLIR, or on therm, I should say. But we did get, some interesting audio and heard some stuff. So there's something definitely to that, and I love that approach. I think that more individuals should do that.
I always like to ask this to a lot of the guests, especially the guys that are the boots on the ground type. But what was your most terrifying experience? And that's for both of you.
Chris, you want to go with that?
I used to say 2013, my experience with my son in the tent. That night was probably the first time I've ever been afraid camping. Since then, some things have happened that are on par with it. I mean, probably more shocking. I get scared easy. You ask Shane when we go camping, I'm usually the first guy in bed because I can fall asleep when I hear other people talking. But if we all go to bed at the same time, I'll just sit there all night and not sleep. But probably one of the most shocking experiences was in 2018. Rebecca and Nathaniel Bronis and I camped in an area down here in Southwest Washington. It was a known area with activity. And that's the thing, when we go out, we select areas, we do our homework. There are areas where there's a lot of activity from the past in. And so we'd pick this one particular area that had activity at the time of year we were there. And we just camped, and then we went for a night hike. And mind you, part of the, 99.9% of the time we're out there, absolutely nothing happens. And it was just another night hike. I'm not into night hikes, but Nathaniel was, and we had our flares, and I mean, it was 39 degrees, lightly raining. It was not a really great night, but we decided to go hike up this road because he wanted to. And we get about a half a mile from our camp, and he decides he's going to do 3 knocks on a tree. So he does his 3 knocks, and so we're just standing there, pitch black dark. It's about 10 o'clock at night, and I can't see anything. I got a little FLIR Scout, and they're not the greatest FLIRs in the first place, and I can't see anything but really the road and us. And we sat there, like, just being quiet in the dark for 2 minutes because I had my audio recorder going, so I have it all recorded, which is kind of cool. But just as the 2-minute mark hits and we're about to start moving again, Rebecca says, "I think I hear," and right as she says, "I think I hear," power knock. And I'm not kidding you, this power knock was within 20 yards of us. I mean, it sounded like a gunshot going off. And it's funny, Nathaniel at that time, he never cursed, but he's like shit, and I literally jumped like, oh God. Rebecca grabbed onto my Carhartt, and I was spinning circles in the middle of the logging road trying to see anything. And it, with the rain and the vegetation was so thick, I couldn't see anything. But what Rebecca had begun to say is she'd heard movement above us because we were right on a ridge. We were on the road and it came down. Well, she was hearing movement above us, but after that knock, we were also hearing movement down below us. And ever so often we would hear these two individuals above and below us moving. We couldn't see them. And Daniel was like, I'm jumping in there. I'm like, no, you're not. I mean, I was holding him back. But that was that just that freaked me out. So we stayed there for probably another 45 minutes, and they waited us out. And I'm like, let's just go back to camp and see if they follow us back. And they did. Whatever did it. Several hours later, while we were asleep, I picked up my audio recorder, picked up a couple knocks just outside of camp, and that was it. But that knock, when it goes out, when a power knock goes off right next to you, that'll make you think twice about what you're doing.
Sure.
Yeah. Shane, what about you? What about what's your most terrifying experience?
Yeah, I'll say that. But real quick, I'm looking at the chat here, and I see a lot of former military individuals in there. I just want to thank you guys for your service. I come from a military family as well, both in Britain and the States. So thank you all for your service. That's tremendous.
And I did want to say something about your brother on here too, live. Shane's brother won the Ranger Challenge.
Best
for
Ranger
2022.
Challenge, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So big kudos to his brother and his family. Excellent job, really. So
yeah, it's really amazing. Thanks for mentioning that. I'm very proud of my brother Joshua, him and his teammates. What an amazing accomplishment! But anybody that serves to me is just it's a hero, and he or she doesn't matter, serving this country. And so thank you all. But
I just wanted to give him kudos. That's about it.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. No, I'm
welcome,
very proud of him. And it's quite an accomplishment. But, when it comes to encounters or experiences, I'll be honest with you, I've had a couple. In fact, down in southwestern Washington, not too far away from where Chris actually works this area a lot. We had an experience that, for me, it wasn't terrifying, but I was with a group of individuals that made it more terrifying because one of the things when you go out with a group of individuals, some are experienced and some aren't. And when they experience something that they're not familiar with, you can't predict what they're going to do. And I feel like I have to take care of them a little bit, just me. And then you worry about what could happen. So we had a crazy experience down in southwestern Washington where we had a tree pushed over and vocals and stuff moving around us. And that was pretty harrowing. But to be honest with you, to date, it obviously was my sighting in 2011 up in Mount Hood National Forest in August. I was out with a couple of buddies, coworkers. I'm an avid fisherman, and they wanted to go on a backpacking trip out in Mount Hood National Forest and do some fishing out there in some high alpine lakes. And we went out and built our base camp at a lake with the endeavor to go out and visit other lakes within the 3 or 4 days we're going to be there. Well, we got our base camp set up, and we went hiking out to find the next lake. Well, make a long story short, we got lost. We ended up hiking 17 miles that day because we got out there early in the morning. We got hiked up 17 miles, got completely turned around and lost. Ended up on this ridge line above our camp, and a lot of bear sign out there. A buddy of mine brought a pot and pan. He's from Boston. He's not familiar with the woods, and he would bang this pot and pan to scare the bears off. It kind of ticked us off, and so eventually I gave him an extra sidearm that I had on me, which was a mistake, and I can explain that later. But I just wanted him to stop doing the pot and pan thing. And as we're up on this ridgeline, we're making noise, we're arguing with each other, we urinate, all this stuff, and this all comes into play, I think, later on. So eventually we find our way to the lake we were supposed to be heading to. And this lake, we eventually I see Kevin Morrison in the chat. He's been out to this lake with me. But we make it out back to our camp. We find the lake we're supposed to be fishing, but by that time it's getting dark. It's getting in the evening. So we decided we found the trail. It's only, it's about 2 miles back to our camp. Let's just go back, and we know the trail now. We get back to camp and, collect a bunch of firewood. My buddy Ian, who was afraid of bears, wanted to make sure we had a fire going all freaking night. So he collected a bunch of firewood, which is hard to find up in these areas because a lot of it's wet. We're in the Pacific Northwest. And so, this is August. Things were dried out. So we cook a meal. We talk about our plans for the following day, which lakes we're going to be hitting up, and, build a big fire. And we go to bed. We go to bed about 11 that night. And around 2 in the morning, 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, we hear what sounds like, or I shouldn't say we. So the way we were camped, we're right next to a lake. We're kind of in a triangle pyramid formation. I'm at the front. I got my buddy Mitch, who's closest to the lake, and my buddy Ian, who's closest to this little hill. And we're kind of in this bowl. And we, Mitch and I are awake because we hear something moving around in the woods. And, let me backtrack. First of all, we heard what sounded like rock clanking coming from a distance. It's getting closer and closer and closer. And it's repetitious. It's getting closer. It's coming from a distance, several yards. Maybe 60, 70 yards away. Getting closer and closer, and it's just repetitious. And my buddy Mitch goes, "Did you hear that? Or do you hear that?" And I said, "Yeah." And we're kind of whispering back and forth. We're a couple of feet apart. And I'm trying to think in my head, what could this be? Could this be elk? Could it be, a raccoon? Could it be this or that? It's getting closer and closer. And that's when we started hearing something kind of move around our camp, just on the outskirts in the brush. And out there you have salal. You have some different berry species. The ground cover's not very tall out there, but you have a lot of Douglas fir and stuff like that out there as far. Big old growth trees. And you hear something moving back and forth, and it's breaking sticks. And I don't know if it was breaking sticks off the trees or just walking on the ground, but it's moving back and forth around our camp. And we're listening, and some time goes by. Ian's still asleep. He never heard any of this, and eventually, after that movement, it starts taking off, and we hear that same, almost like rocks being smacked together, but it's getting further and further away. So it started back up and moves away. Next morning, we get up. My buddy Mitch and I, who heard this stuff, we're talking about it, and our buddy Ian thought we were messing with him because he's afraid of bears, and he didn't hear anything, but he was out. And so we're trying to rationalize, well, what could it be? And, well, we didn't know. And once again, I was into Sasquatch at that time, but I had never heard anything like that in the woods, never experienced anything like that in the woods. So my mind didn't go right to Sasquatch. I was trying to figure out, what could this be? We were out on a fishing trip in a kind of semi-remote area and just trying to rationalize it. So our plan that day was to go fishing. That's what we did. We went out to fish like 2 different lakes that day, caught a bunch of brook trout and cutthroat, high mountain lake fish. And we come back to camp after a full day of fishing, visiting these 2 different lakes. Come back to camp with the idea of going back out the following day to some other lakes in this area. There's about 7 lakes roughly in this area. And we were going to go visit some of the other lakes we had not fished yet. So we do the same thing. We collect a bunch of firewood. We build a big fire. We have a meal. We talk about our plans for the following day. And we go to bed about the same time, about 11 o'clock at night. Ian falls fastly asleep. He's not the avid outdoorsman. He's pretty beat up, so he goes to sleep. And Mitch and I, we both fall asleep eventually as well. Once again, around that 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, I hear that same sound, that same clacking sound. And it's coming from a distance, but it's getting closer and closer. My buddy Mitch goes, "Shane, you awake?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Hey, it's back." And I said, "Well, I know. What the heck is this?" So we're listening. It gets closer and closer and, repetitious. Just like, you and I walking down the road, just doing this, And it sounded like 2 rocks being just smacked together. Well, it gets fairly close to camp and it stops. And that's when we start hearing it sounded bipedal. I couldn't be sure, but it sounded bipedal. Something smashing the brush, walking back and forth around our camp. And we're kind of in we have a little bit of a hill to the Chris Spencer's been there, but we have a little bit of a hill kind of next to kind of inclines. And this thing's just kind of going back and forth. And my buddy Mitch is hearing something off to his left towards the lake. And I'm hearing something off to my right. And so I'm thinking, well, as we're whispering back and forth, I think, well, it could be two of whatever the heck this is. Well, I mean, but this is a lot more, it was a lot louder than the night before. Whatever was moving around sounded more trying to intimidate us or something, just moving back and forth, crushing stuff, breaking sticks, breaking branches, crunch, break. Well, that stopped after a short spell, and there was silence. And in this forest, you know, a lot of times you're up there camping, you could hear a pin drop. It's so quiet. I mean, we got elk, we got deer, you got bear, you got everything out in this area. But it was just dead quiet. And that's pretty typical out in this area. No wind or anything. Well, after that, we're sitting there laying there. I remember laying on my back, listening, going, what the heck? It's back. And then bam, 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 bam. 5 in a row, as Chris will describe them, power knocks. I mean, just tremendous. You could hear something. I mean, you could feel it too, hitting a tree. And you could feel the vibration on the ground underneath the tent from something just smacking the snot out of a tree. Well, now my buddy Ian is awake, and he's cussing up the storm. What is that? What's going on? You know, I said, shut up. Be quiet. And he shuts up, and we're laying in our tents, and nobody's talking at this point. It's just quiet because you can hear the echo across the valley in this little area. We're, you know, and my heart's in my head. I can hear my heart beating because I'm like, what the frick? Wow. Yeah. And I was freaked out. And there was a point where I felt paralyzed, but it was paralyzed from adrenaline and fear. And right. I'm just trying to walk myself out of this. And then I hear something coming through the trees above us. In the camp spot, we have a bunch, like I said, Douglas fir. We have a bunch of trees around us, big trees. And I hear something coming down, hitting the branches, coming from the hill and coming down. And it's just hitting the branches and then thud right next to my buddy Mitch's tent. And he's the closest one to the lake. And in front of him, you have a bunch of skunk cabbage and you have this like muddy patch. And I knew exactly what just happened. Well, I knew what was thrown at us. And my buddy Mitch said to me, he goes, you know what that was, right? I'm like, yeah, that was a rock. Because it was a clear thud. So that happened. And so my buddy Ian, he's freaking out. He's still freaking out. I gave him a sidearm. He had no business having a sidearm on him. Once again was a mistake. You know, one of those stupid things you do just to calm somebody down. Right. Not thinking anything would ever happen in a million years. Would never do that again. But I'm thinking this guy's going to shoot somebody. He's freaking out. He's just, you know, so I'm like, I got to get out of my tent. And he's right next to me in his tent, you know, a couple of feet away. So I'm going to get out of my tent and I'm going to get that sidearm away and calm him down. He's freaking out. He's an out-of-stater. He's only been in the state for 2 years. He's never been out camping and he's not been around bears. He's afraid of them. I think he's going to shoot somebody. So I start to unzip my tent. And the whole time I'm like thinking, please don't see anything. Please don't see anything. I don't want to see anything. I just want to calm this guy down, get the sidearm away from him and come back into my tent. And I zip my tent and I'm looking around. And all of a sudden I see almost directly in front of me, you know, 30, 35, 40 feet away, I see something swaying back and forth behind a tree. And what I basically see is there's this really large Douglas fir there. And what I see is a hand and an arm. And then every once in a while, I see a head pop out from behind the tree, a head shape and a shoulder. I didn't get a whole lot of detail. It was large. It was big. It was, you know, having gone back and measured it, it was about 7.5 feet tall, but it was massive and it was just swaying back and forth. And I couldn't tell if it was looking at me. I couldn't tell if it had heard me unzip the tent or not, but I was, you know, I didn't move. I didn't move a muscle. I was looking at this thing sway back and forth. You know, it wasn't going fast, just slow, but it was moving out. And I could see the arm. I could see, you know, a hand on the front of this tree and the shoulder and whatnot. And this thing, after a couple seconds, just peeled away. It took its arm down. It dropped it. It walked out from behind the tree, turned its back on me, and walked up this trail and disappeared. And long story short again, I never got out of my tent. Ian had calmed down because everything had stopped. And Mitch, I could hear Mitch kind of breathing heavy. He was, we're all pretty freaked out. And I just stood there. And when I saw this thing walk away, I zipped my tent up and I just kind of sat there for a while. Then I laid down. As soon as daylight hit, I don't think anybody else went back to sleep. Nobody talked after that. We collectively gathered our stuff. We were supposed to be there at least another day. We collectively gathered our stuff and just hiked out back to our vehicles and drove off and barely spoke a word the whole way back home.
I
Yeah.
got a question for you. You guys have been out there so much doing it. I mean, like I said, I had my sighting. DA goes out every so often when he's not busy. Me too. I have an area here in Florida. What do you think? Your opinion on the wood knocks, the rocks, and the rock throwing? I mean, what is your opinion on that? And the reason I ask everybody this, I want to get it. I like to get different opinions on what they think. What their behavior is.
Yeah. A lot of people poo-poo on the knocking sounds. They're like, oh, that's new age. Not, they didn't used to report that stuff. Yes, they did. They used to report it. It's been reported for a long time. And I'll let Chris, because Chris and I are on the same page when it comes to what we think. We hypothesize some of these knocks mean. But I'll say this about the rock clanking and whatnot. First of all, I personally believe that, at least up in the Pacific Northwest, when you get up in some of these areas, all the limbs are, wet. You hit once and they'll break. They'll splinter everywhere, explode.
Right.
Not that you can't find one really good one. But when you think about Sasquatch and the reported, reports where you hear rock clanking or rocks thrown at you that night, and this is something I thought about for years now, and I'm pretty solitude on this, that I think the majority, not all of them, because some, I definitely believe that some of these knocks we hear are, a chest slap or something, it's mechanical, comes from the body. But I think up in the Pacific Northwest specifically, if you're going to hit a tree, if you don't hit it with your palm of your hand, if you're a big individual, you're going to find a rock.
Right.
You can hit a rock and it's not going to break or explode. And then also that rock can be thrown. So that rock is multi-use, whereas you find a branch or a stick up here and it explodes after one hit. What I heard in 2011, there was 5 solid knocks, and then shortly thereafter that rock came in. So later on I put 2 and 2 together, going, maybe that Sasquatch was hitting the tree with the rock and then threw it in the camp. Barcatino in the Sierras, he recorded something being thrown kind of in their direction. It was a rock, they assume, and it registered as a heat signature on that thermal unit. Probably because that Sasquatch had been holding that rock for so long that the heat just transferred to the rock. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of these knocks, it's much easier to hit a tree with a rock and not have it explode, and you can throw it, whether Sasquatch uses rocks to hunt, or it's just multi-use. And limbs can be. I think they do that as well. But that's just my idea. And then you could smack rocks together. Maybe it's a form of entertainment. We could look at chimpanzees. They've done studies on that, throw rocks at trees and make a knocking sound.
Right.
It's on video. So there's a lot of use for a rock. But Chris hasn't spoken in a while. I know he's got some thoughts on the knocking itself, and we're in total agreement. So I'll let him jump in here.
Right to you, Chris. Go ahead. Take it over.
I think the vast majority of the knocking is directly related to us, the human presence. And, it's just been my experience with recording. Generally, the bigger power knocks occur when we're there. Now, that experience that I told you about, like I said, 2 minutes plus minutes went by before that knock occurred. I think they were in the area. They heard Nathaniel knock, and they let us know. And I think the power knocks are specifically, they want us to know. They want us to know, and I think it's a form of intimidation at times. I had another experience going into my main area with my son. We went in on a very windy day, and he was at the time he was 15, and he was, 15-year-olds, they're always bouncing around. He's doing his own thing, and he wasn't real into the Bigfoot thing, but on our way in, he had said, "I feel sketchy, Dad." And I'm like, "It's just the wind." It was a real creepy day. It was really windy. Well, we got down to where I record, And just before you walk through a marsh, and just before you get into the timber to the specific spot where I record, we almost stepped on an elk. The cow elk was bedded down there. I mean, we literally almost stepped on her. And it dawned on me, the wind was in our face. We were coming in upwind of everything. She didn't smell us. She didn't hear us.
Right.
And she bolted and went downhill. Well, we got to my recording stump, and there's another marsh through the timber down the hill from us. And it was like just a couple minutes after she had bolted, right where she had bolted, power knock. And my son he goes, Dad, I think it's time to leave. And I just looked at him. I go, it could be the wind. And he's scared. And I was a little nervous, but I knew it was a power knock. And a couple minutes after that, whatever had done it had moved up even closer to us, to our southern position. It occurred to the west of us, and all of a sudden it was to the south of us and closer. Pow! And at that point, I actually drew my pistol, and I turned, and I just in time grabbed him by the hoodie because he was taking off running. And I stopped him and said, "We're going to walk out of here.
Mm-hmm.
Just be quiet. Just stay calm. We're going to walk. We don't run. You never run." And we started walking. Well, there was a knock up the hill from us. So there was multiple individuals around us. And I know what happened is they didn't know we came in. They didn't smell us. They didn't hear us come in. And when they realized we were there, they let us know they didn't like that. That's what I took those knocks for.
Do you think those knocks are also maybe a warning for the other?
Oh, absolutely.
The other ones in the area, to let them know, hey, we have humans here in the area. I mean, okay. Because I've heard that too.
I've had another experience actually with Shane. We were up at camping with a friend of ours, Dave Hallett. And the camp we were at is right up against a rock cliff, basically. It's maybe 100, 150 yards from where we were camped, maybe a little bit more. And right at dusk, a recorder up there, up behind camp, and then he told us he's going to yell, "Hey," just "hey," you know. And we're like, okay. So me and Dave were sitting by the campfire, we're chatting, and we hear Shane yell "hey," and I yell "hey" back, which I wasn't supposed to do. And then we just continue talking, and a few minutes later, pow, right behind me and Dave, and it was a power knock. And I look at Dave, I go, I didn't think Shane was going to knock, because generally me and Shane, we don't knock. We don't.
Right.
I don't. And nowadays, I don't try to elicit anything, because I'm trying to capture audio and I don't want any contamination. So I looked at Dave, and Dave's like, "Yeah, that was a really loud knock." And I'm like, "How did he do?" I mean, it was a huge knock. Well, we just started talking again and just assumed it was Shane. Well, 10 minutes rolls by and it's almost dark, and finally Shane comes into camp, and he looks pissed. And he goes, "Did you guys knock?" And I said, "No, you knocked." He goes, "I did not knock. Whatever did it got between him and us." And I assume what happened, it came down and it's like, "Oh, humans," whack.
Yeah.
And took off. But yeah, that was in every instance, personal instance where I've encountered these power knocks, I have no doubt in my mind it's a direct result of me being there. And I've got knocks, or percussives as I call them, on my audio from when we're not there. I generally don't get the power knocks though. Usually I'll get knocks with vocalizations sometimes, and I'm sure it's some kind of communication with each other. But these power knocks that people are hearing in person, I absolutely believe it's connected to the people being there, and telling the other Squatch in the area, there's people here. That's what my take is.
We get a lot of chatter here in Florida. A lot of chatter. I mean, there's some knocking, wood knockings. I'd never heard it myself personally. Never heard the chatter, like I said. Structures, stuff like that here. I think the area like you guys are in up in the Pacific Northwest area, I think they act differently, like we talked about, me and DA. Like Texas, they're more aggressive. Florida, certain parts of Florida,
Southeast Oklahoma,
more aggressive. Other parts, and it's like what I said before, man. When you go into a neighborhood that you're not supposed to be in, okay, they're going to be aggressive towards you. And if you walk into Beverly Hills, you're going to be like, oh, okay, all right, have a nice day, and that's a different neighborhood. So, I mean, I think that's what's going on. You're going to have your good clans and your bad clans, and that are not too keen with humans, and then there's other ones that are like, okay, they're pretty cool, you know. They're only out, you know. They're interested in us. They want to see, you know, what's going on. You know, it's like any other animal. You know, I mean,
right.
I think individual temperament plays a big role too.
I mean, bluff charges in Florida. I mean, I know a lot of people have bluff charges in Florida. So
yeah, I was going to say the individual temperament as well, but also perhaps the season. I mean, nobody knows when these things breed. You know, I mean, you walking on a moose on the wrong time of year.
Oh, you're done.
You're done. You walking into the mama bear and her cubs. You're done.
You're done.
I mean, yeah, at least you're in trouble. So the season and we don't get I mean, we talk about knocks and percussives specifically. We don't get a whole bunch, and we do get them periodically. We don't get them all the time. So there's a lot of question there. It's like some of these vocals we record. We get certain vocals at certain times of year in different areas and seasonally. So, you know, just like any known animal, they're going to give off different sounds. You know, when a female moose, for example, is looking for a mate, it lets off this. Chris knows what I'm talking about. It gives off this groan noise, and it sounds like lapping. It sounds like,
right.
And anybody that's not familiar with a moose, it's crazy sounding. But anybody's not familiar with a moose will go, "What the hell?" It sounds like a hyena.
Right.
You know, but it's a seasonal thing in a certain time of year. It doesn't do it all the time. And so it's just, I think Sasquatch is the same way. You're going to get certain vocals in certain areas and certain percussives seasonally and in certain areas. Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, no, I just saw Derek Buckles' question down here, and I actually done knocking experiments with my recorders where I would go at 30 or 90 foot, 30-yard increments from the recorder, and I would hit a tree with wooden baseball bat, with a rock. And then I actually had a poor buddy out there doing this for me while I was recording, and he would throw rocks against the tree and also smack rocks. He about broke his hand doing that against the tree. But visually in spectrogram, they all look like percussives. You can't really, I can't visually tell the difference. It's the audio, the pitch, and the tone where you can sometimes tell the difference. We did rock on rock also, but I've done quite a few experiments with the knocking. A lot of it was to see how far they were, because when you're looking at things in spectrogram, the smaller the image, that sound is occurring further away from your recorder. And what I actually found was a lot of the knocks that I picked up when I wasn't there were occurring a lot closer to my recorder than I originally believed. We went out to 125 yards, and so most of the knocks that I pick up on my recorder in this specific area were happening within 30 yards of my recorder, and I think they were happening because they knew my recorder was there. I could talk about that. I've had it every area that I've done long-term recording in, at some point in time, if the target subjects are using that area, at some point in time, they notice that recorder, and I've had them get close to it. And I think some of the knocks that I've gotten big knocks right next to the recorder. I've had stuff that, for all intents and purposes, were thrown at the recorder where a definite rock hits the tree next to the recorder and falls through the branches in the middle of the night out of complete silence. So, but you know, as far as telling the difference in spectrogram, you can't tell really the difference. You can with gunshots,
Right.
and knocks will look different in a spectrogram. But as far as whether it's a rock hitting a tree or a piece of wood hitting a tree, I'm not able to tell the difference. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, visually looking at this stuff. Yeah.
Some years ago, this would have been somewhere around 1990. Some buddies of mine and I were at deer camp up by Richland, Missouri, and my deer stand was pretty far from camp. And when I got back and it was pretty late. And they're like, "Dude, have you been messing with us?" I'm like, "What do you mean? I just got here." They're like, "You know that popping noise you make with your tongue?" Because I make this real loud like noise with my tongue. They're like, "Somebody was around camp doing that for like half an hour." I'm like, "Dude, I just got here. I was way down the bluff." I said, "You sure it wasn't like a wood on wood sound?" They're like, "No, it sounded just like you popping your tongue." And I've often wondered if it's not something, that some of the knocks that we're hearing might not be organic.
Absolutely. That's, like I said, I think some of the percussives I'm getting on my long term, those are being created biologically. David Ellis actually does a spectacular percussive with his mouth that you would swear was a power knock.
Oh, I can do much louder than that. I just kind of did it for
yeah. So
you can hear me for blocks.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think some of the percussives we're hearing are probably they're producing it themselves without having to hit something.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, even like coming down here, man. I mean, the stuff. I've noticed the difference in just the areas how they act. I know an individual that rushed, and DA knows who he is. We had him on the show. Rushed into the swamp area after one. Okay, seen it stand up, rush in after it, and he got whacked in the chest with a branch, got knocked out. Okay, so I mean, is it being aggressive? Of course. I mean, it's probably just it's territorial also. Even with the rock throwing. Every story I ever hear, when they throw rocks, they never hit anyone.
Right. Yep.
They're always landing next to people. And I think like it's like a deterrent, like, hey, if I want to, I can take you out, be cautious.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they're doing, to let us know.
Yeah. Aggression is subjective. So everybody, when they're in the woods or having an experience, aggression is a subjective term. What may be aggressive behavior to you may be like, oh, not so aggressive to someone else.
Right.
And like you put, Anthony, almost every report I've ever taken or anything I've ever heard or anything I've ever experienced, whether it's a rock or something else thrown, it misses you. It doesn't hit you. Now, I've heard of, you can go back to like John Meinzinski, for example, when he was out in Wyoming and had his incredible encounter out there in his tent. He had pine cones being tossed at his tent, little pine cones, and some of them were hitting his tent, but they're pine cones. And they're not landing around you. Right. Not going to hurt you. Derek Randall's Olymp Project had boulders. I mean, they had rocks thrown at them, and not one hit them. Could have landed very close. My experience in 2011, just one rock, it missed the tent. But you get loads of reports like that, and it's not just rocks; it's limbs and other things.
Mm-hmm.
So some people might go, "Wow, that thing was really aggressive," and I go, "Was it?"
No.
It's like a bluff charge,
Right.
Gorillas. They're everybody thinks they can be really aggressive, but 9 times out of 10, almost 10 times out of 10, they can do a bluff charge or this, display themselves and to somebody, oh, they're aggressive. No. There's that, they're basically just warding you off and warning you. It's a sign of trying to persuade you not to do something or get away or show their dominance. There was a video out 2 years ago of this guy, this idiot, on his cell phone walking down a trail, and he sees a couple of kittens on the trail. Little mountain lion kittens.
Right.
And all of a sudden, Mama Cat, and he keeps following these cats. But Mama Cat comes out and she charges him and throws her legs at him and hissing. And everybody's like, "Oh, that cat was stalking him. It was aggressive." And no, that cat was warding him off. If that cat wanted to take him down, it would have.
He would have been done already. Yeah.
It would have been done. Yeah. No, it was just a form of it was a charge. It was get away from my kids. Yeah.
Right.
And I think Sasquatch and bears do it. A lot of animals. So to each their own, I guess. What you may call aggression may to someone else be like just a form of intimidation. And not necessarily aggressive behavior, but just natural behavior. If they want to be aggressive, you'll know about it. I think Sasquatch specifically.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
I mean, look at some of the stories, man, that you hear. I mean, how true are they? I don't know. Unless it happened to me or DA, then I'd be like, okay. I mean, really. I mean, like we know that guy. I know somebody that got hit, but he pursued it. He went after it, and so that thing was just to me was defending itself or defending its clan, being like, okay, stop, enough. But it's like you said, if they're going to be aggressive, it's like that. What was that one story, DA, where it attacked the cabin?
From when Fred
1924, maybe.
Yeah, the Gate Canyon story. Okay.
Yeah, the Gate Canyon.
When Fred Roll was on.
Yeah.
Well, that too.
Yeah.
Well, they shot at it too.
Yeah,
that too.
More than once.
Right. You shoot at me, I'm going to shoot back too. I mean, really. I mean, so I can understand that.
I think a lot of the rock throwing too is sometimes they just want to see if they can get a response or a reaction from us, because I know of people, and we've experienced it ourselves, where we've been in our tents asleep, and all of a sudden rocks start coming into camp, hitting around camp, and I think sometimes they're just seeing, well, let's see if they're awake, let's see if we can get them to move. I have no doubt they do stuff like that. That's my thinking on it. I think from what everybody's describing of these things, if they wanted to be aggressive, I don't think you've really seen aggressive yet, because the stuff that we're seeing is more like Shane's talking about is it's showing a little intimidation, but I don't think it's meant to cause us injury or anything. It's just saying, hey, I'm here. Just letting you know I'm here. So
I think the cases that have been truly aggressive are probably the missing 411 cases.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's another subject alone. I mean, it's like we talked about here. Somebody goes missing in a camp area. They're not going to call in special operations to go look for a kid.
No.
They're not going to fly in, 2 Black Hawks full of Green Berets and be like, all right, go up there and look for this kid. It's not going to happen.
Right.
And a lot of cases they're doing that where there's eyewitness reports, and I'm like, makes no sense to me.
The ones that intrigue me the most, and I spent the better part of 20 years in law enforcement. I've dealt with tracking dogs. Those dogs live for the track. And the cases when you hear where a tracking dog just refuses to track, that's the ones that kind of bother me, because I know I've worked with these dogs. Getting on the track and chasing something is what they live for, and for them to just lay down and refuse to track something is really telling to me.
It's even like my sighting, man. My sighting, I had dogs on the swamp buggy with me. They didn't even alert to what I seen.
Right.
They just laid there, and it was only 100 yards away.
Shane, what were you going to say, sir?
I was going to say, you know what? I mean, when it comes to, I won't get into depth on this, but when it comes to missing people, having lived, in California, and I used to go to Yosemite. That was my spot. I mean, I used to go to Yosemite. I lived in San Diego, but 11, 12, 13-hour drive. I used to go there all the time, and there was always missing people.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of times, 9 times out of 10 they're found, but some weren't. And there was some very, at the time I was going up there was a serial killer. So a lot of those were explainable. Not a lot. There was a certain sect that was explainable, but people do stupid things and they get hurt. I've seen it time and time again. In fact, I've done some stupid things where I could have easily gone missing. Nobody would have found me. I've corrected that behavior, we'll just say. But there are some interesting cases where people go missing and there's no real logical explanation real logical explanation. I think the vast majority of them are people who get lost or are not prepared. I've seen this firsthand happen time and time again. The Olympic Project, while we're out, we look for missing people a lot of times. We'll get calls to look for missing people. So a lot of these individuals are just ill prepared and they get lost, fall down, and they get off trail. When you don't stick to an itinerary and you're supposed to be in this area, but then you end up in another area, no one's going to look there. You're gone. You're toast. If you break a leg, you're done. You're toast.
Oh, yeah.
If you fall through the snow, you're toast. Fall off a cliff, you're toast. You get between a mama bear you're probably toast. You get between, you got a cat, a mountain lion cougar stalking you. That's a bad scenario. If you're not prepared, even if you're prepared, that's a bad scenario. You come in contact with some weird people. People always ask me, well, why do you just carry bear spray? Why do you carry a weapon? Because I'm not out there to shoot a Sasquatch. My weapon's going to do diddly squat. I'm more worried about people than I am bears or cougars. And I've run into black bear frequently. Black bear up here frequently. I've been tracked by a cougar before. Chris, these are familiar scenarios for us. We live up in the Pacific West. We have a lot of different wildlife, and we go to remote areas.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not prepared, you're not aware.
Right.
Even if you are, you're always taking a risk. But
it's true.
If you're going down a trail and you're not going to stand your ground, you see a black bear, you're ill prepared, or a cougar, and you start to run, you think you're just, you may like that cat's right on, that bear's right on your tail. Chances are you're going to do whatever you can, go any direction to get away from that individual. If you're, you never run from an animal, first of all. But if you're scared and you're due to set a fight, flight, you can end up where nobody's ever going to find you because you took your butt off trail and they're not looking for you. And they always talk about looking for a sign. Oh, there should have been a struggle.
Right.
Well, that struggle may have happened 100 yards off a trail. And if you look at most of these, and God bless these guys that go out and gals that go looking for individuals, SARS and these guys, they have a specific pattern they do, gridding.
Grid, right.
You could be another 10 feet off the trail and no one's going to see you. So a lot of this stuff to me is, and sometimes your body's found years later or never found, but a lot of stuff is explainable, but some of it's not. I give you that. And, like I said before, if you get caught between a mama bear and her cub or a cat and her cubs, or just a cat or some weirdo, that's a bad scenario. Well, what happens if you get caught between, a Sasquatch and its offspring, or the wrong season? Maybe you got a little bit of a horny Sasquatch, that's a male that's
exactly.
Look at a male elephant or moose. Man, bad scenarios to be around if you're in that season.
There's a lot of stories that they're talking about, that you have police officers coming out and making statements and actually sending stories in to where they were part of a special, what was going on, that these women were found and they were taken as children. And now how true is that? I don't know.
Right.
Anybody could bullshit anybody. So,
yeah.
It's like what DA said.
Any Bigfoot account, whether it's a cryptid, any kind of cryptid account, no matter what it is, without full proof to back it up, they're all just stories.
Right.
Some of them we can take at face value. Some we'll be skeptical about. But whenever I talk to an eyewitness, I use the same techniques I learned in law enforcement. Mm-hmm. I look for the tells that let you know whether or not they're being truthful.
Yeah, a lot of unanswered questions here. I mean, who knows? I always tell people, no matter what, if you're, when I do this, I kind of break my own rule, but don't venture out alone. Don't venture out alone, and at least have an itinerary where you're going, what time you're leaving, what time you're going to be back, and do not deviate from that. But some people do. And when I go out, I try not to deviate from that plan, even though I do go out a lot of times solo. I try not to deviate. I let multiple people know where I'm going, so if anything happens. But I'm also prepared. I tell people, carry a freaking sidearm. Yes, carry bear spray and all that, but carry a sidearm. Be familiar with that sidearm.
Exactly.
Better looking at it than for it.
Exactly.
And, so I mean, just the simple things. Know how to get home. Know where your car keys are at. Know where you parked. Know what the weather's going to be. All that stuff, because anything can change in the woods, and you could get injured. You have the best intentions, but shit happens.
Yeah, I always say make sure you let somebody know where you're going, what your route is going to be, and when you expect to be back. Yeah. That way, if you don't have cell service or if something happens, somebody knows you're overdue.
Yeah, it's easy. Some of the stuff that you hear, it's just it's nuts. I mean, even the vocalization that you guys had.
Right. I was just going to say, I saw a comment earlier. I think it was Cryptid Woods said something about a banjo in the woods. You know what? I'd rather hear a knock than a banjo. I'd rather hear a knock than a banjo. I hear a banjo, I might pull my sidearm out. I'm like, whoa, what's going on here?
Yeah, exactly.
Deliverance 101.
Yeah. Especially down here, let me tell you. The stuff that you guys have going on is just crazy up there. It's just nuts. I mean, that stuff is so thick that you guys are in. I mean, it's a rainforest, basically.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
how many years out of how many times out of the year does it rain and it's wet there?
Chris, I'll let you answer that because you're a Washingtonian.
There you go.
It's our summers can be kind of dry, but pretty much it's always wet.
Exactly.
I work outside. I'm wet from today. It's always raining. At some point, basically October up through July, it's pretty much raining all the time. I mean, we'll have a couple days of sun and then there'll be rain. So
Now, do you notice any different patterns during those months with the Sasquatch out there, or no?
can't say that I do. I know as far as recording audio, springtime is one of my favorite times to record, and the fall is one of my favorite times to record. There's definite uptick in the months of March, March through May, because I've been fortunate enough to record in 3 different areas. One being the nest area, but also I have 2 others down closer to where I live that I've done a lot of recording in, and March and May are huge increases in suspect vocalizations and percussives, and then August through October there seems to be an uptick. So
Well, that's with a lot of animals. You got an uptick in spring and fall.
Yep.
Right.
What you mentioned the nesting area, and that's something I wanted to touch on. Obviously, I'm not going to ask for longitudinal coordinates. I don't want to know anything like that. But tell us a little bit about the nest area. I don't think a lot of people realize exactly what those ground nests are.
Well, they're located basically on the east side of the Olympics up here in Washington. They were discovered by a timber surveyor, timber cruiser, who was out in a remote area, 2.5 miles behind the lock gate and way off trail. It's a very thick huckleberry. He was marking a future timber cut with flags, and he was below a ridge, walking on some plateaus or fingers coming off this ridge. I always describe it, if you get your hand out and you look at your knuckles, that would be the ridge, and you have these plateaus or fingers that come off there with ravines in between. And he was going up and down. And he came across on this one finger, this one plateau, some odd nests, some very large ground nests. And this individual, he'd been basically doing what he does, surveying for 27 years for this big timber company up here in the Pacific Northwest. And these ground nests blew his mind. He'd never seen anything like this. They kind of freaked him out. They looked semi-fresh to him. They were all made out of huckleberry, which is a evergreen huckleberry up here. And he came across them in the month of May. And they were still green, and he got weirded out. So he hightailed it out of there, got a hold of his boss, got a hold of a couple of DNR, Department of Natural Resources guys, and eventually got a hold of Derek Randalls of the Olympic Project, because Derek by trade is a landscaper, and Derek had done work for this individual, this surveyor, 10 years prior. And Derek's an avid outdoorsman, hunter. He's a guide, and he's well known, around the country for Sasquatch. He's been in a ton of documentaries, been at this for, 30 some odd years. And he just wondered if Derek had ever seen anything like this, these ground nests, because he had never seen anything. This timber surveyor in all of his years had never come across anything like this in all of his years. The guy's seen it all. He's come across bear beds, elk beds, he's run into everything. And so he invited Derek out along with our partner, James Millian of the Olympic Project. The owner of the company came out, and a couple of DNR, Department of Natural Resources, came out to this area. 2.5 miles behind a lock gate, way off trail. And between them all, we're talking over 250 years of woodsman's experience. None of them had ever come across anything like this. Blew their mind. And they knew they were standing at something special, something weird. At looking at these ground nests, these ground nests they look like a giant bird nest, basically interwoven huckleberry branches of different sizes, smaller on top, lower on the bottom. And so basically, what happened was that they were all perplexed and interested, and they said, "Hey, Derek, this is your thing. You're in the Olympics. This is kind of your neck of the woods. And Derek was very interested, and so was James Milling, because that day they found a total of 7 along this ridge line, or this finger. And, they eventually came to the conclusion, hey, this is something interesting. You guys, we're not going to log this area for a long time, for a couple of years. Give you a key to the gate. You guys can study this area, look at it, see if you can figure out what the heck's making these nests. And, we got, at that time, 5 years to study this area, in which we soaked up. And over the first year and a half, or basically that year, we found a total of 23 ground nests spread out. You have a cluster of 7 on this finger or this plateau. Another 100 yards away, you find 3 or 4 more. Another 100 yards away, you find another 3, so on, so on. A total, including 2 bush nests, or practice nests, as we call them. And these nests are off the ground. They're a mirror image of what's on the ground, but they're built into the huckleberry, a couple feet off the ground, into the huckleberry bushes. But they're just a mirror image of what's on the ground, interwoven, smaller branches, won't hold any weight. And the reason we call them practice nests is because Derek Randles had done a lot of study on nests in general, and when we came across these 2 bush nests, Derek was doing this online study and noticed that gorillas, because these nests mirror gorilla nests, almost to a T. Different material, but they're just like a giant gorilla's nest. And these bush nests that were off the ground, they are very similar to what female gorillas do for their young, and vice versa. They teach them to build a nest, and the gorillas will practice making nests above ground in bushes and just practice. And they look like a practice nest. Whether that's subjective again, we don't know, first of all, we don't know what made these nests. We have our ideas, and I'm pretty solid on my ideas, but it's really interesting that you don't only had the ground nest, but you also had these bush nests. And the fact that gorillas, the behavior is so similar, it's very intriguing. And we've done a lot of study on these nests. We found multiple impressions in this area, feet and hands, and we've come across some hair that's been analyzed visually that appears to be primate hair, unknown. And the nests are interwoven. We brought Dr. Jeff Meldrum out once, or actually twice now, and he noticed after we deconstructed one of these nests that some of the huckleberry boughs were actually pushed into the ground. Not a whole lot, but a few around, almost as a frame. And then the huckleberry was kind of interwoven, not woven, but interwoven around it. So it wasn't just like something just grabbed branches and threw it down on the ground. This was intelligently designed, and it took something with strength. And there's no doubt in my mind, it took something with an opposable thumb. No teeth marks, no claw marks. Something snapped these branches off, twisted them off, and in some cases, dragged branches from over 25 feet away, and sometimes over 8 feet off the ground, and brought them back and constructed these nests of different sizes. The biggest one we found today is about 8.5 feet by 6 feet wide. The smallest is about 3 by 4. So yes, multiple nests of different sizes. And people claim that, it's bear or this or that. I'm a hunter. I've been out in the woods a lot. I know a lot of people, by wildlife biologists, they'll tell you bears don't build nests right next to each other. And they don't, you'll find teeth marks, claw marks, you'll find scat. None of that's been found in this area. And the hair, it's not bear hair. So you tell me. Yeah.
Owissa Khan asks us, Huckleberry, did the beds have canopies or just the ground version?
Just the ground version, no canopy. It wasn't like a structure. It wasn't like a teepee or anything. No. The canopy, the only canopy in the area is the Douglas fir trees, which are 80, 90 feet off the ground, very thick. So you can't really fly a drone over the top. And we get a lot of rain, but it's a perfect spot to build a nest because the rain is minimal. It'll penetrate the trees. But between that and staying off the ground, you're going to keep pretty dry and warm because you got these huge nests that are over a foot in depth. Derek Randles and I built a nest, and it took us over 45 minutes between the two of us to actually get anywhere close to building one of these things. But there's no above structure. No, it's just on the ground. Just imagine a giant gorilla's nest or a giant bird's nest on the ground made out of huckleberry. And the bottom branches are, in some cases 2.5 to 3 inches, mainly 2.5 inches in diameter. And the upper layers are much thinner, more like, sapling, very small. So it was constructed intelligently.
You said they're very much like gorilla nests, like the ones that Dr. Jane Goodall had in her documentaries.
Yes, very much. These are all oval in shape for the most part. There's one or two circular shaped nests, but most of them are oval, like bathtub shaped, but wider. And you can see the heavy impression where something has been laying in these for a period of time. We don't think these were made overnight or for an overnight experience. These were probably made for a semi-lengthy time in these areas. Maybe a couple of days to a week. That's all, once again, conjecture. We don't know for sure. But the amount of work that went into making these nests told us that this was not a one-night stay. And the amount of hair we found in these, where they're positioned, very strategic, very military-like. A lot of them were in like a V formation with, like, say, a point nest, as we call it, because they're right below these fingers is a steep decline down to a seasonal salmon-bearing creek. And we do hypothesize that these nests are made in the months of February and March, mainly March. When the timber surveyor found them, they were in May. But we're getting a lot of vocals, as Chris explained, in March, in February, March, April, which also coincides with a seasonal salmon run in these areas. So there's a ton of protein in this area. You have deer, you have a ton of different wildlife, you have all sorts of wild berries. It is the perfect scenario, like the perfect storm to build nests. And I'll say this, we don't think Sasquatch is making these nests, if they are, because I haven't seen one build a nest, so I can't say they do that. But if they are making these nests, which we hypothesize and think that they do, it's more of maybe a seasonal thing or a birthing process where if you look like at orangutans, they give birth every 6 to 8 years, roughly. If Sasquatch is anything like that, they'll probably give birth every 4 to 8 years. And you're only I think these nests are made for a birthing scenario, personally, or a nursery scenario. And I have a lot of reason to suspect that. I mean, a lot of people don't know that in 1967, in Bluff Creek, the Patterson-Gimlin film, that same year, there was a nest found above Scorpion Creek, which feeds into Bluff Creek. There was a nest found by a timber surveyor. These nests are almost always found by timber surveyors. And there was a nest found above Scorpion Creek, which feeds into Bluff Creek, which is a stone's throw away from where Patty was filmed, the Patterson-Gimlin film. And she's a female. Did she give birth? Was she going to give birth? What was that scenario? The fact that there was a nest found in that same year is very interesting to me. And it's also interesting that, once again, these nests are found by timber surveyors, timber cruisers, the most part. There have been others found by other individuals. But they're always found in areas where people don't hunt, hike, fish, or go to because they're nasty to get to. They're hard to get to unless you have a job to do, like surveying, where you have to get into these areas to make that timber cut, that survey flag. You're going to go to these areas. And they're always above creeks because, as most people know that are familiar with the timbering companies, there's a certain distance they have to stay away from a natural creek or natural river. Yeah, and that's where these nests are being found, is that proximity to that river or creek bed. And I think that is fascinating.
Well, what are you guys' opinions on tree structures?
Chris, go ahead.
I would just say most of the stuff that I've seen online is probably made by humans or snow load. I'm not saying that it's not possible, but I personally, I've seen a few odd things. I've seen limb twist breaks, of course, in association with tracks. But generally, unless there's something else to go along with it, I find most of it to be natural, at least in the areas that I'm going into. I've found bushcraft stuff, and people go out. That's big nowadays, is go out and make their homemade shelters. I know for like the Sierras and areas and in the Rockies, a lot of people, these teepee structures they're finding, those are actually archaeological sites. Those are, I can't remember the name for it, but most of the Native Americans in Southwest were building these temporary little structures, teepee-like structures around trees, to camp out in. So a lot of the quote-unquote teepee stuff, I absolutely believe is created by humans. I'm not gonna say that all structures are. I'm not gonna say that Sasquatch couldn't do one, but I don't know why they would. Honestly, from my experience, they don't need to. Uh, like Shane's discussing with the nests, these aren't occurring all the time. They're not a typical. They're not a structure. They're literally a nest that it mostly looks like something a gorilla would build. Um, I think Kevin Morrison said something in the chat. One of those nests actually had two softball-sized rocks next to it that had been scored. They had score marks on them, and it was the point nest closest to the creek area. So, as far as the structures go, I'll let Shane give his 2 cents on structures. But like I said, I would venture to say most of them are caused by natural occurrences or human beings. That's my opinion, though. I'm not an expert on structures.
Right. And sorry for despairing. My mic keeps sliding down. I have to keep trying to fix it. I got ill prepared, I guess. But when it comes to structures, I've only come across maybe one or two in all my years on the woods I thought were weird or different. And it goes with a lot of like tree breakage. Most of the tree breakage, I think, can be explained away as natural phenomena or human or equipment and whatnot. But there are some structures out there that are odd, definitely. The vast majority of structures that are found, there's data on this, actually. The vast majority of structures found are near a human trail or a human footpath or something like the vast majority.
Yeah.
The ones that really intrigue me are the ones like the nests, and they're not a structure, but when you find something way off in an area where people go everywhere. I mean, people go, oh, there's no one ever been here, or we're way off trail. And you know what? People do weird things. People go weird spots. And so
what about the cases? Oh, sorry about that.
Go ahead.
What about the cases where they found trees that have been snapped off around the 8 or 9 foot break, ripped out of the ground and shoved back in the ground? Those have been found here in Missouri.
Well, yeah, I'll let you get there, Chris. No, go. Actually, go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
Well, I know for a fact loggers do that up here.
Really?
Oh yeah, they like to mess with people. That is, I know loggers. I grew up in a log town. Yeah, in Washington and Alaska, I know for a fact loggers do that stuff a lot, and they've been doing it since the 50s. It's not something they just decide to do. Sometimes they're doing it to mark an area that they're going to set up something, and a lot of times I know the loggers around here who've done it. They're messing with people.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with. I'm familiar with loggers now, but I didn't grow up around loggers. What I've noticed is that I have talked to loggers that have done this specifically, and you get the argument that, well, there's no. When's the last time someone's seen an actual evergreen, still green in the ground tree that's been pushed in the ground? I mean, maybe they have, and I'm not arguing that, but a lot of times these trees have been there for a couple years to 20 years, and people come across them, and it's weird. It looks weird, but you're not going to find, everything's going to grow back. So you're not going to find evidence of, tire marks or equipment. You're just going to see a tree pushed in the ground upside down. It's the same thing with rocks. There's an area up here in Washington. I had, a couple of people from out of state come up on an expedition up here in Washington, and they saw these huge rocks put on top of a stump. Huge rocks. And you're like, how did they get there? And a lot of times you don't see score marks or anything on them. You're like, wow, I don't see any scratch marks. These loggers are clever and they're funny. They'll get a strap and they'll put it around the rock and place it on there. Because if you pick up a rock, and I've done it, I used to work landscaping. I've moved a lot of rocks, and if you pick up a rock with any sort of excavator or backhoe, you're probably going to, unless you cover it, you're going to leave big scratch marks on it. But if you use a strap or burlap or something and pick up that rock and place it on a stump, no one's going to know, and it looks weird. I mean, it just stands out. There's a stump, a cut stump in the middle of nowhere, and there's a giant rock on it. These loggers are clever. They're funny, and so I can't say, once again, that Sasquatch doesn't do that, but once again, there is an explanation for a lot of those. Not everyone, but there's an explanation for a lot of those.
The other thing I wanted to ask, and this is kind of a secondhand story I received. I have a couple friends that live on one of the reservations in Oklahoma, just across the border from Missouri. And one of them was telling me one of their elders had found evidence of flint napping on stones much bigger than they would normally use. So do you think that that it's possible that Bigfoot might be making tools, primitive tools?
Not me. Once again, I don't see any reason why they'd have to, considering their size, and they're they're not using fire. And I just I think people tend to I can't think of the term right now. They try to make them more human than they are. They're their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
They're definitely a primate, but I don't see any reason for them to be constructing tools. And that's just my opinion. Once again, everything I've encountered or recorded is more ape-like than anything. And anyways, I'll let you, Shane, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think people don't give Sasquatch enough credit. I think they're so intelligent for their environment, so intelligent for their environment. I'm not saying they're smarter than us or anything. I'm saying when we go into their environment, we're the dumb ones. They're so intelligent. I think they can utilize and do whatever the heck they want, but I don't think they're out there building tools. I think they can utilize a rock, a limb, their fortitude with their body size, their speed, their intelligence for living in the woods. Many of us are really good in the woods, but we don't live in the woods. We don't live in it 24/7. I mean, a lot of us have skills and we can survive and do good things and thrive, but not thrive like a Sasquatch. I just don't think there's any need. Some of those tools, and I've seen pictures of them before, I can't explain them. I can't. I'd love for somebody to carbon date them to see when they were made, possibly, and all that. But up here in the Pacific Northwest, all the venturing I've done, if I would assume I would come across something of that nature, and I never have. I have come across, Native American artifacts, you name it, both in California, in Oregon, and Washington. I've come across Native American artifacts. Never come across anything that I would assume is out of that realm. Anything I have, it's obviously human, but once again, it's one of those questions that I cannot fully answer because I don't know.
Yeah, I found, along some of the rivers in Missouri, there's a place I like to go called Moon Valley, and it's pretty way off the beaten path. And all along the river, along the Niagara River, we would find arrowheads and even some of the carved fishing hooks. A couple of times we found broken spear tips, but we've never found anything big. And that was, like I said, it was a kind of a secondhand story that a friend told me. I was just wondered if you guys had run across anything like that.
No, but no, it's interesting. No, I'm actually in I think it's a Facebook group, that talk about, they collect stuff, and most of that, a lot of those, man, it's amazing how many arrowheads and Native American artifacts or stuff like that are found in the states like you live in. We do find them out here, but it seems like the eastern, southern area of the country, Midwestern, man, there's a lot of artifacts found. It's pretty cool. I lived through you guys vicariously.
There's so many different Native American cultures that moved in and around through the Ozarks. It's not difficult to find artifacts like that. My uncle, who had 180 some acres right along the Niagara River Valley, every time he would plow his garden, he'd kick up arrowheads.
Yeah, and actually, so speaking of that, if we're talking about the 1924 Fred Beck incident, Ape Canyon. If you look at that incident, and I believe it happened personally, and maybe it didn't, and I can live with that. Mark Marcel, who's the number one expert, if you've not had him on your show, he's just a phenomenal individual. But Mark Marcel,
I haven't had him, but I'd like to.
Oh, he's phenomenal, and you will not regret it. But he's done the most. He's actually found the cabin site. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I've been to it, and that's why I can claim that it's the cabin site. He'll tell you that he believes it is, but it is. It's the cabin spot. But, look at that event there and look out through history when it comes to Sasquatch. You don't hear them chucking spears or anything like that at people. It's rocks, it's limbs, it's sticks. You don't hear of any large, triangular shaped sharp objects being thrown at people. It's mainly rocks, sticks, and stuff like that. So the 1924 event, if it happened, those guys in their cabin were pummeled with rocks and stones and yeah. So yeah, I'm not come across anything that would say, they're making tools. I think they have all the tools they need naturally, and they know how to utilize them really well.
I've often wondered about that because I've heard stories of large flint knapping being found and primitive tools being found, but in a lot of cases they probably are Native American. But it's one of those things that kind of intrigued me, and I wanted to get you guys' opinion on it. I really like the approach of the Olympic Peninsula because the Olympic project, because you guys aren't afraid to say something when something is something else. Some of those shows, some of the shows you watch on TV, they'll show a picture of a track and it's a bear track, and it's obviously a bear track, and they're like, it's a Sasquatch track. I much prefer the approach where if it can be debunked, debunk it. I would rather say this is a bear track, this is a mountain lion track, than try to pass it off as what it's not. And that's something I enjoy about you guys' approach, because you'd rather say say this is not it than try to pass it off. I like the evidentiary approach, and I guess that's the cop in me.
Yeah, I mean, well, exactly. You know this all too well, DA. I mean, it's Occam's razor. You go with you try to debunk, you try to rule out everything before you go into the unknown, or and once again, being a part of the Olympic project, we get sent a ton of stuff, and sometimes I feel bad because people send us stuff and they're very absolute on it, whether it's audio or a track impression or a structure. And unfortunately, most times it can be explained. If Sasquatch was doing all this stuff all the time, it'd be a done game. I think Sasquatch is a rare thing. I think it's a rare thing. I don't think there's a whole bunch of them out there. I think they manage to survive in small numbers. I think they breed in small numbers, and they breed very infrequently. They're not like I don't think they're breeding like us humans, where we can pop out kids every year or whatever. But or other animals that can, I think they're just small in number. And so when you come across something of significance, it's a gold. It's gold. It's rare. Tracks included. Not that people don't find them. I've been privy and seen some amazing stuff over the years. But I think most times a lot of stuff, if you're not familiar with what you're looking at, like a double bear stamp, a double bear impression, it can look very much like very much like a giant footprint. But there's subtleties there. It's little things you can look for. They could tell you otherwise. And that goes across the board. Most people, when they come across something odd or weird, they don't investigate it and they write it off as, not most people, but a lot of people that are involved in this subject matter, when they come across something that they can't explain, they write it off to Sasquatch or something of that nature. They don't investigate it. Well, where's the next impression? Where's the next step? Where's the near, could a human have done this? Is there a tire track there? Is there this? Is there that? They don't investigate it, because it's so easy nowadays to take a picture of something and shove it online and get a lot of feedback, positive feedback. Oh, wow, that's amazing and all that. But there's no context. And so if there's no context, I don't care how good that thing you're showing me is, I'm going to rule it not. You have to take good notes. You have to have good context. I mean, I know Chris can talk about this well. He's seen a bunch of this stuff over the years. And I'm not trying to poo-poo on anybody's parade. To each their own. Everybody can do whatever they want. We live in an amazing country. But we're so adamant about the research and the data that we have to fall through and rule out everything before we ever get to, okay, is this
what could this be?
What could this be? Is there a possibility? And we go at great lengths. I mean, we got tons of stuff in our portfolio and in our archives that we never shared publicly because it's just not good enough. And we don't know.
I had some friends that swore up and down that they'd heard Bigfoot howls, and when this was out in Colorado, and they told me, like, dude, you've got to come hear these. I'm like, did you record them? And they're like, no, we didn't have anything to record it with. This is back before cell phones. Like, we didn't have anything with us to record it, but we know it was a Bigfoot. I'm like, all right. Well, so a couple days later, we went back up there, and we're sitting around the fire and getting camp set up, and all of a sudden, I hear this god awful cry, and they're like, there it is, there it is. I'm like, guys, that's an elk. That's an elk bugle. And they'd never heard it before. So, their first thought was it had to be Bigfoot. I'm like, guys, there's so many things out here that make a lot of racket. That's an elk.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, because I focus on a lot of the audio. I do a lot of our setting up our audio recorders, and then I do a lot of the reviewing. But um, with the audio, I'm looking at everything visually in spectrogram, and I think I've stated it before. In area X1, my first area, I recorded over 1,500 hours that year, and out of that 1,500 hours, there's maybe 5 minutes of suspect stuff. I keep the door open too, because there have been things that I couldn't find, I couldn't identify at first, but a couple years down the road, I find out, okay, now I know what that sound is. And so I I keep I don't close the door and say, okay, that's absolutely positively a Sasquatch on anything. I just log it, catalog it, and try to vet it as best as possible. The stuff that that being said, I do have things that defy what what you would find here in the Northwest. I mean, I have gorilla-like vocalizations and I have chimpanzee-like vocalizations. There's no animals around here that are going to do this, and I defy any human to recreate some of these sounds. Those are the ones that interest me, but they're far and few between. I do get audio sent to me a lot, and usually the person sends me audio one time and then I never hear from them because they just want me to tell them it's a Sasquatch, and 9 times out of 10 I'm going to tell them it's a barred owl or it's a coyote. Probably one of the biggest mistaken vocalizations for Bigfoot is a coyote warning call. It's the alpha male will do a scream howl. And generally he does it when there's a predator in the area. He will be the only one that does it, drawing attention to himself and away from his family. And it is a creepy call. I've recorded it probably close to thousands of times now, and everybody thinks that's Bigfoot. Everybody. The Puyallup screamer, that's a coyote. That's a coyote. I'm sorry. I'm positive. I recorded it so many times it's ridiculous. But I'm going off on a tangent. Sorry, but
No problem.
coyotes. I tell you what, coyotes have a huge range of sound, and they do some crazy stuff sometimes. And in different areas, different packs will have a different sound. Different packs will use different calls in different ways. So the best thing to do, and this is what my approach has always been, is when I get in an area, I record there for long term and get to know that specific area. And that's, anyways, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent.
No.
No problem.
Yeah.
Foxes make some really odd
Yep.
noises.
Yep.
And if you're not familiar with the sounds in your area, a screech owl can scare the living crap out of you.
Well, and that's the other thing is like I said, grew up hunting, fishing, camping, spent all my free time has always been in the outdoors. I grew up here in Washington, and when I first started recording, I thought I knew what was going on in the woods sound-wise. No. I've learned so much in the last 7 years doing this, because when you're out there hunting, fishing, or camping or hiking, you're focused on what you're doing. You're not listening to half the sounds that are occurring around you. And then at night, I'm specifically recording dusk till dawn. There's stuff that occurs at night that I never heard before, and I've lived my whole life out here, and I consider myself an experienced outdoorsman. I have friends that, they're loggers and they're hunters, and I've never heard anything, and they'll bring me a barred owl call. I'm like, I thought you've heard everything. You've been doing this for 45 years and you've never heard a barred owl. Nighthawks, their wings. I've been on camp. I was on a camp out years ago. We had a nighthawk buzzing the camp, and everybody thought there was a bear walking around camp growling. It was a nighthawk. So I try not. I always take the approach. I don't know everything, and there's going to be stuff that surprises me, and I get excited when I get known animal vocalizations that I've never heard before. That excites me. When I get a species of owl that's not a barred owl, I get just as excited for that as I do Sasquatch quote unquote calls, because the barred owls are ridiculous out here. They push all the other owls out. So when I get other species of owl, that excites me.
Yeah. I'm just going to say really quick that just to compliment Chris there is that, one of the arenas or programs, not programs, but sites we use is the Macaulay Library of Sounds. They got a huge library of sounds, and anybody can look it up. It's free. And you can compare known sounds to some of their sounds. Now, it's an amazing free library of sounds, but they don't have everything recorded. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I like to say is that, imagine, DA, you're walking into your room, it's 2:00 in the morning, and you stub your toe. What kind of noises are you capable of making at 2 in the morning when you stub your toe?
I'm going to invent words that no one's ever heard before.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Well, animals are just that capable, not that they stub their toe, but we do not have every sound every animal makes, an animal hurts itself in the woods. I don't know what, a coyote falls down, breaks its leg, it gets attacked.
Or gets caught in a trap.
We don't know every sound they're going to make. We can look at it visually and we can compare it, but sometimes we can be wrong. But it's just the same as humans. When you stub your toe, you can make ungodly amount of sounds you didn't know you were capable of making. So it's one of those things where animals do the same. And so that's why it's important, like Chris said, to stay in one area. And when he said for a lengthy period of time, he's not talking months. He's talking years on end in one area. We spend the time recording and hiking, exploring, and to the point where Chris, in some of the areas that we traverse, especially X1, where he's familiar with his area, he can name certain coyotes, or used to. I think that one passed away, but coyotes and elk, and he's got certain names for them because he recognizes them visually speaking, not just by his ear, but by his eyes visually looking on a spectrogram. So that's a very important point.
It's kind of like how Navy sonar operators could identify individual whales.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Well said.
I know years ago, Missouri had a big problem with coyotes overpopulation, and they were taking out farm animals and stuff. And the Missouri Department of Conservation put out bounties on them, and you could sign up with them and go out and do these predator calls and bring in coyotes. And I used to do that quite a bit back in the late '80s. You could make the bounty off the ears, but something people don't realize is some of the predator calls you used to draw in, like dying rabbit screams. You'd never realize a rabbit could make that much noise.
Oh yeah,
right. Crazy. Yeah.
Or a deer in distress or a fawn, they can make an incredible amount of noise. And if you're not familiar with the call, you'd be like, "What the heck is that?"
Yeah, there was a number of years ago in San Bernardino down in California, there was a big story about these hikers that were out and they heard a baby crying and everybody got worried and they sent the researchers in there and they were looking for this baby and never found the baby, but they did find a rabbit that was in distress. So, yeah.
They make some odd noises.
Yeah, like you said, animals make weird noises and given their age and all that, I mean, who knows? Just who knows? So, when you get more familiar, and I don't think anybody can be an expert on every animal noise. They can't, because everything's different seasonally, experience-wise.
And they vary from part of the country.
The only thing you do at the end of the day is, if you really get into this phenomena, Sasquatch, or if you're just into biology and wildlife sounds, is like what Chris and David Ellis heavily do. I dabble in it. But Chris here and David Ellis of the Olympic Project, and your guys like Mongola Hala, and there's others. I'm not naming them all, and I don't know them all. But looking at stuff visually, you can actually compare stuff, and you can rule a ton of stuff out. At the end, you can rule a ton of stuff out. A lot of times you can't rule out everything, but when you have such a library of known animal sounds, you can go back and compare that stuff. And a lot of times you get the same individuals on these recordings. So
we had a question from the audience. Data Quester says, "What animal makes a high scream sound with a metal scraping on metal at the same time? I've only heard this once in the woods." It's nothing I'm familiar with.
It's a really... go ahead, Chris.
Oh, no, that could be a number of owl calls. Barred owls, actually, the younger ones will do a lot of screeching. I have even got some coyote that has that almost metallic screeching sound. Usually when you're getting up there in the higher hertz levels, higher pitches, you're talking about the coyotes and then birds of prey a lot of times. I can't say without having heard it or looked at it myself, but I've gotten stuff that sounds like that metallic high screeching pitch scream, and that's, for me, it's usually been either coyote or some kind of bird of prey. I'd have to hear it, because obviously some sounds are going to be canine like, some are going to be avian like. There's each, you know, I use my eyes, but I also use my ears. You get hear get used to hearing tones and pitches on different things. So eyes first, though.
Well, we're coming up on the 2 hour mark. We'll start winding things down. But I had one other question I want to ask you guys before we start wrapping things up. Is what would be the best advice you could give somebody that's just starting out, wanting to learn more about this subject?
I'll go. It's very simple. Somebody that's getting into the subject matter is very, very simple for me. And for many of us and I haven't been doing this as long as some. I've been at it for a long time. And in some cases, I learned the hard way, the very hard way. First and foremost, if you can, stay off social media. Stay off. If you want to have fun at this, well, that's the first and foremost. Have fun at this. Get out and do it for yourself. Don't do it for likes, hits. Don't do it for TV. Do it for yourself. If you're really passionate about the subject matter, do it for yourself. Get in for the right reasons. And then, I'm not saying stay off social media entirely, but just be ready, because everybody has an opinion. And the saying, opinions are like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Have fun at this and don't take anything to heart, and also be skeptical. Be as skeptical as anybody out there, be skeptical. But at the same time, the more time you spend off of this, square thing in front of me, the computer, and the more time you spend in the woods, the more you're going to learn about your environment, nature, and maybe why Sasquatch would be out there at all. And you'll probably learn more than anybody just sits at home and likes to get on their computer and smash you because you talk about it, you ask a question that maybe has been asked 100 times on social media, but you're new to this, and they just assume they call you a newbie and an idiot. Yeah, that's what happens. So don't look at social media for answers, and don't look for, don't ask too many questions on there. Find this stuff out for yourself. Read a lot of books. Find the right individuals to talk to. And also look for people that, if you're going to get involved with groups or individuals or ask questions, look for people that challenge you, but are not condescending at the same time. People will go, okay, and people with experience. And that's important. People with experience that won't, condescend on you, and that will listen to you, have an open ear. And it's hard to find. It's getting harder and harder to find nowadays, but there are people out there. But have fun. Stay in an area, even if the area has not got Sasquatch reports ever. But it's got bear, it's got elk, it's got deer, it's got turkey, it's got whatever. It's got water sources. Maybe there's sightings, or maybe Sasquatch is in that area, but maybe there's just a lack of people. And so it takes a person and a Sasquatch to have an encounter or a sighting. That area may hold Sasquatch, or maybe Sasquatch passed through there, but maybe there's no reports because people aren't going to that area. That'd be the areas that would intrigue me more than jumping on a site going, oh, there's been a lot of reports over here. I'm going to go there. Well, guess what? Everybody else is checking out that, and they're going to be there. So that knock you hear, that sound you hear, is probably coming from another researcher, investigator, or enthusiast. Find those areas that, you can really get into. But also be safe. Be safe at what you do. Don't take risks. And just, prepare for every scenario. The wilderness, know your backpack preparedness, and tell people where you're going if you're going to get out in the field. But do a lot of online research and a lot of in the woods investigations. And so that's what I got to share. Have fun at the most. Have fun.
I'll just go back for myself. I had pretty intense experience in 2013, which spurred me to actively go out in the woods looking for evidence of this. But I already had a curiosity about nature. I've always been a learner. I love being out in the woods. I love learning about the woods. And I try to keep an open mind, but not so open that my brain falls out, as Grover Krantz used to say, and a number of people have said. And like Shane said, find people you enjoy spending time with. If you have kids, take your kids out. Like took my son out. Take your family out. Enjoy the woods. And if you have an area where there are known reports, go spend your time fishing and camping in those areas. And keep your eyes open. Like Shane said, do some research, listen to people online, but don't spend all your time online. There's a balance. You've got to have some know some of the history of Sasquatch, read some books, good books like Dr. John Bendernagel's books. You know, and like Shane said, don't get caught up in the drama online. If you don't like hanging out with certain people, don't hang out with them.
Right.
I mean, I'll be honest. I could care less what anybody thinks. I'm doing this because I enjoy what I do. I mean, like I said before, when I first started recording, yes, I really, really, really hoped I would record something that was Sasquatch. But that wasn't the only reason. I was really interested in knowing what sounds are occurring at night in the woods when no people are around. That actually interested me. So it's having more than just Sasquatch being the reason to go out, being
Right.
the reason to do stuff. And if you do this and you're serious about it, get an audio recorder and turn it on as soon as you get out of your vehicle. Because when I'm out in the woods, I have an audio recorder going all the time. The minute I step out of my rig, it's on. I give a time and date, and I have a little strap on the back of my hat, and I put it up there. And that's why I look stupid sometimes, but I walk around with a recorder on my head because it's when I least expect it that we've had stuff happen. And then at least you have the audio from the experience if something does happen. But don't expect it, honestly. I I mean, it took me months and months before I recorded anything that I could take to David Ellis and Monongahela and have them say, you know what, Chris, you have something interesting there. I mean, it wasn't I just started recording and automatically started getting Bigfoot on the recorder. And just be open to learn and have fun with it. Find that the part of the subject that most intrigues you and go with it.
Bam.
I think that's great advice. And worst case scenario, if you go out in the woods and you don't find Bigfoot, you still got to spend time in the woods, which is always a wonderful experience.
Absolutely.
One last question from the audience before we start wrapping things up. Mark Napier asks, he says, "What do you guys think of the Dogman subject?"
Well, first, honestly, it's not really my thing. Up here in the Pacific Northwest, I think I've only heard of ever up where I'm at, and I take a lot of reports. I've done Monster X Radio since 2013. I've had one report of a supposed dogman, and it was very questionable just up here. I know in other areas of the country, they get other reports. I know some of those are misidentifications. I mean, and that goes for Sasquatch as well.
Yeah.
The one report that I investigated that someone said they saw a dogman ended up being a bear. It was a bear. It was just straight up a bear, and that was down in Oregon. But I don't rule out anything, but I will say that I know nothing about the subject matter because it doesn't intrigue me. And I've never come across anything or talked to anybody personally. I've had, Linda Godfrey on my show on Monster X Radio, and that's her world, the Beast of Bray Road sort of thing. But I stick to one unknown, at least unknown to most, known to me, which is Sasquatch. And so that's all I want to talk about. So sorry, that's just me.
Perfectly understandable. Chris, what about you?
Some of my favorite movies are werewolf movies. I love werewolf movies.
I love a good werewolf movie.
That being said, I'm not going to say people haven't seen what they've seen, but I personally highly doubt it's a real thing. That's just my opinion. Once again, I noticed it because when I got into this was back around 2013 after my experience. That's when a lot of Dogman stuff started happening, and Sasquatch Chronicles was on, and he really pushed the Dogman thing. So I see a lot of uptick from certain podcasts, reports, and now everyone's seeing them. Not saying they're not seeing something, but it's like Shane said, I'm not interested in it. I like watching werewolf movies, and that's about it.
All right. Well, guys, I appreciate you guys coming on tonight. I just posted the link in the chat for everybody. You can check out the Olympic Project at olympicproject.com or check out Monster X Radio at monsterxradio.com. You guys will definitely enjoy the project, the Olympic project, and Monster X Radio. I've been a fan for a while. Guys, thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day and hanging out with us and answering our questions, and really appreciate you guys coming on. I love the documentary that was done with the guys from Small Town Monsters. Just a big fan of you guys' work, and I appreciate you guys taking the time to come in.
No problem.
Man, thank you. Thanks again for the invite, for having us on. It's been a blast, and once again, just thanks for having us on. Thank you.
Anytime. Yeah. Thank you for coming. Well, folks, if you like this show and like this type of content, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Share the video with people that enjoy this type of content, and check out all of their stuff at Monster X Radio and the Olympic Project. It's all those links are both in the chat again, and appreciate each and every one of you in the chat asking some great questions tonight. And we've had a really great time tonight. Hope you guys will join us this Saturday. We will have another live show just like this one on Saturday, and appreciate all of you guys coming out, and appreciate everybody joining us, and I hope you guys have a wonderful night, and we will see you guys on Saturday. Good night, everybody.
Thank you for joining us tonight on DAX Machina. If you ever have an encounter of your own that you wish to discuss, contact us at daroberts@daroberts.net. You can remain completely anonymous if you wish. Pull your covers up tight and keep a nightlight burning bright. Oh, and did you forget to lock your doors?